Hello guys, Colin here. I like to solder my cables. Not only does this give me the satisfaction of a job well done, but the slow lead poisoning will probably cut short my miserable existence, which can only be considered a blessing in today's global climate of rampant idiocy and political incompetency. People have asked me in the past, why don't you just use a solderless system? And my answer has always been, I don't trust them. With a soldered cable, I know the connections are good. I've got control over the way the cable is put together, and if anything goes wrong, it's only myself to blame. With a solderless system where you're pushing or twisting a cable into a connector, it's all about trust. You've got to trust that the connection was made, and then trust that it will hold. Faith is a wonderful thing, and we honestly wouldn't get very far without it, but when it comes to cables, I'd much rather have certainty they're not going to fall apart on me in the middle of a gig. For me, solderless cables are nothing but a time bomb, ready to fail at any moment with no guarantee they were ever solid to start with. Now, I told all of that to Three Monkeys when they got in touch and asked me if I'd like to try their new solderless cables. They acknowledged the shortcomings and failures of other solderless systems, but assured me that they'd specifically engineered both their cables and connectors to be stable enough to use night after night on a touring board without failure. After a deep explanation of the product from the Three Monkeys guys, I'm now more intrigued than sceptical about these things. Everything they said made total sense to my scientist brain, and the only thing holding me back now is my deep-set prejudice. So will I find that I was right all along and solderless cables are not to be trusted, or are these things actually pretty good? Well, I've got two review packs here, one of audio cables and one of DC power cables with enough to make two of each. So we're going to build them, test them, and I'll try and give them an honest review based on their ease of use and their robustness. We have the two review kits here on the workbench, the DC power cables and the audio patch cables. There are written instructions contained within, but the back shows pictorially just how simple it should be to put these cables together. Cut the cable to length with a sharp blade and then screw the connector into place. No stripping required. A sharp Stanley blade will give a clean cut through the cable, and this is the tool that most people will have to hand. I'll be using these lovely Knipex cable shears which slice cleanly through cables. Don't use standard pliers for this, those will crush the cable as they cut. You want a clean, flush cut for this to work. We'll start with the audio cables. I'm going to trim this cable to length and then tidy up both ends so they are nicely prepared for the connectors. Then it's simply a case of screwing the connector into the cable until you feel it resisting you. Bend the cable at a right angle. Using a multimeter in continuity mode, we can test to see if the connections are good on both the sleeve and the tip. It appears that we've made a successful cable. Let's try the DC power cables. These are the same idea. Cleanly trim the cable to length, tidy the ends, and then screw the connector home. These ones felt a lot more solid to screw on and were more obvious when they'd reached their end point. Once again, we can test continuity with our meter. And we have another good cable. Plugging them into our pedals, we should see that we get power and hopefully sound. But how sturdy is a screw-in connection? Can we pull this cable out of the connector? After a few fairly solid tugs, it looks like the connector isn't going anywhere. The only way for these connections to come back off is to disconnect them from the pedals and then manually unthread the connector. This allows us to see how these connections function. The connector consists of a threaded barrel with a pin in the centre. When the cable screws in, the threads cut through the black insulation and make contact with the braided shield beneath. Once the cable bottoms out into the connector, the centre pin pushes itself between the strands of the cable's core, forming the second connection. So what are my final opinions on these? Well, they're both certainly robust enough to be used on a pedal board. These connections are not going to pull off or unscrew themselves from the cable while in use. I do like the low profile design of both styles of connector, meaning you can get the pedals close together, and the cables are stiff enough that it can be bent into formation and it'll retain its shape, which is ideal for routing around a pedal board. I feel, however, the audio cables are still lacking something in the design. They could do with some sort of a cap that either pressure fits or threads onto the back of these to keep the cable at 90 degrees, which would give another level of assurance the cable won't come away, as well as aid the aesthetic. They've got a bit of an anorexic look about them, and while I've proven to myself that they won't come apart in operation, I still can't shift the feeling that they look a bit flimsy. Perhaps I'm just not ready to trust solderless audio cables yet, despite them performing their job perfectly. However, I really do like the DC power cables. These felt a lot more solid when I screwed the connectors on, they don't look as disproportionately weedy, and I feel they would fare better over time than the audio cables. I think custom length, easy to make power cables are an excellent idea, and they certainly don't come any easier to make than these. I would be confident enough to use these on my pedal board. For everyone who's already sold on Solderless, both of these are certainly worth a look for their quality, ease of use and robustness. And for anyone who's still on the fence, I would recommend checking out the DC power cables first, as I think they'll give a much more positive experience than the audio cables. Thanks once again to 3 Monkeys for giving me the opportunity to somewhat overcome my Solderless prejudice. Links to all the products featured here will be in the description box underneath this video. And if you like this video and you want to see more content from me, then you can hit the subscribe button. Patreon's also there for exclusive secret stuff, and there's other videos you might not have seen. But that's all for just now, guys. Keep it loud, and I'll see you later.